All right. Well, another welcome to everybody who is joining us today. And I love seeing all of the faces pop up, especially when I know some of the people who are here. But I'm so excited for our first webinar of 2021. So happy that we are in 2021. And this webinar is going to be a little bit different than some of the other ones that we've done because the subject is for everybody. Anybody who has a mammary gland, which are men too. And I before I introduce Leslie, I just have to say how I met her. So I stumbled upon her book, which is called Probably Benign, and all of you should read it. But it is a bit of a unique breast cancer memoir in that it's not just talking about her journey and her experiences, but it really gives kind of a call to action. I loved her book so much that I sent her an email and was like, hey, your book is awesome. And the rest is history. So anyway, I'm so excited that Leslie agreed to be here today to talk about something that is so important. But so she is from Indiana. I have to say, all these people from the Midwest. I'm from Ohio, so the Midwest is where amazing people come from. And she got degrees in computer science, industrial management. I have no idea what that is, and then she got her MBA in business administration. But then we get to November of 2017 when she was diagnosed with stage 4 lobular breast cancer. I think one of the biggest things I learned having breast cancer is that breast cancer is not the same. And you can get into all kinds of receptors, but before we get into how the cancer does its thing, you have to go back to, there's two types, ductal and lobular, and Leslie will go into those details. But the abnormalities were found on a routine bone density scan. When have you heard of somebody being diagnosed with breast cancer on a bone density scan? That is not typical. And that was because her cancer was not visible on either a mammogram or an ultrasound. And those are kind of the two, at least in that I've heard of, the two tests that most people will get. Usually it's just a mammogram, sometimes also with a diagnostic ultrasound. Leslie's cancer was not found by either of those things. And I think it's great that Leslie points out that it's not anybody's fault that happened. It's a failure of the testing that we have. And she's going to go into those details and give you guys some good information about that. And so that has become her passion, educating people on what tests you need to know about and what you need to do when you get that letter after you get your mammogram that says you have dense breasts. Sometimes every state does it a little bit differently. I think, is it still 36 states where they have to send you that letter, Leslie, or is it more than that?
It's more. Now we're looking at a national mandate that they're trying to figure out what the language should be at the moment. But it's skipped to the national level now. We're not quite ready to roll that out yet. And it's been delayed because of COVID and et cetera. But
good.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
And I'm sure you'll talk about how that came about. That was somebody who got mad and made that energy into something productive for people. And how often have we heard that somebody experiences something and then says, wait a minute, I don't want anybody else to experience this. And I think that's really, that exemplifies what Leslie is doing. She had an experience. She figured out why she had that experience. And now she's trying to make sure that other people don't have that same experience. So without further ado, make sure to look up Probably Benign, and I will turn it over to Leslie to talk about breast density and what everybody needs to know about that.
Thank you so much, Abigail and Laura, for having me. It's my pleasure. This gives me energy. It doesn't take energy from me, to talk about this and to share my story and to really get women. I really have one goal, and that is to get women to understand their breast density and learn their options and insist and persist until they get what they want. And that doesn't sound like much, but it's actually a pretty big ask because it's not as easy as it sounds to do. But at the website, mydensitymatters.org, we do have resources for all those things that people can go in there and download to help them do those things. But I'll back up a little bit and just talk about why density is so important, how it enters into the whole picture of all of this, give a little background. I'm going to talk, I've got like 6 slides. I'll talk for maybe, 10, 12 minutes because I feel like on this particular webinar, Zoom call, whatever it is we're doing, we have educated, curious people who have questions, and I think we will have a particularly good discussion afterwards. So what I will do is share my screen now, and we will get started with some of the background that I want to share with people. And then we'll go from there afterwards with hopefully some really good Q&A and questions and further information. You can see this screen, right? Early detection is key to survival. Okay, great. So I hope you've all heard that before. Early detection is key to survival. That's because it's the only way to survive this disease. So I'm very, very direct when I talk about this, and I hope it doesn't trigger anyone, but it's important to know what the real deal is, I guess. I know, Abigail, you might be the more direct person than I am.
That's why we get along. That's why
right.
We get along.
Yeah.
So well.
So here we go. No holds barred. Here's the real thing about early detection. So this slide is simply a table taken from the American Cancer Society website about the 5-year survival rate of the different stages of breast cancer. So if your breast cancer is found at stage 0 or 1, your 5-year survival rate is close to 100%. That's a good number. That's the number we want you to have, or anybody to have, who has to be one of the 8 women who's diagnosed with breast cancer in her lifetime. You want that number, which means it has to be found at stage 0 or 1. Stage 2 and 3, still curable. Now, it's interesting to note, and a lot of people don't know, so I always do share this. You physically, it's impossible. You cannot die from breast cancer in your breast. No one ever has. It's not possible. I know it's confusing, but the reason is our breasts are not a vital organ. We can do without them. We may not want to, there's all that, but it doesn't kill us in our breasts. It just simply does not, it cannot. The problem is it travels, and it will eventually travel, and it goes to bones, liver, lungs, brain, sometimes other places. And we cannot live without those vital organs working properly. And that is what causes breast cancer fatality. So we have 42,000 about women dying every year from breast cancer in the United States, and that number has stayed the same for 20 years. I fear in the next few years, we might see more because of this huge lag that we now have in everyone breast cancer screening because of COVID. I hope my fears do not come to reality about that. But it might, because a lot of people have put off their surveillance, really for maybe a whole year. That's the problem. And approximately 30% of people treated for those early stage breast cancers will have some sort of recurrence. It can be 10%, it can be 40%. That's a nuanced number, but it's about 25 or 30% will go on to have a recurrence. So early detection, if you're a survivor and still have breast tissue left, this is as important to you as anybody else, this whole issue of breast density. Okay, moving on. So what is the problem then with breast density? The problem is that it obscures cancer in a mammogram. And mammogram is our standard way of finding breast cancer in all breasts. So this diagram here is simply 4 different mammogram images. And it represents the 4 different categories of breast density. By law, your breast density is supposed to be spelled out in your mammogram report. So when we ask women to go find out their breast density, if they've had a mammogram, it should be simple enough to find out by reading your report. It's not always the case, but it should be. That's the whole thing. So category A on the left is what's called a fatty breast, meaning that there's not much density in it. So our breast is really made up of 2 things, fat and all the other things, the lobules, the ducts, all the other things that make it possible for us to give milk, which is what our breasts are really for. I know they become very sexualized and all that, but that's what our breasts are really there for. So those 2 things. So if you're a woman who has the category A, you don't have a lot of those other things, and your breast is primarily made up of fat. And fat basically looks black on a mammogram. Good news for you, cancer looks white on a mammogram. So it shows right up beautifully. Look at that spot on that category A breast. Boom. A radiologist is going to see that, they're trained to find it. They will see it. Good stuff. And also category B, it's called scattered breast density. So it's more fat, less of the other stuff. You can still see pretty well. Plain old standard mammogram, 95, 98% of the cancers in those breasts are going to be found on a mammogram. And wonderful for those women. About 29 or 30% of all cancers are found in category AB women. Now, when you get to category C, which is something called heterogeneously dense, which is, less fat, more density, and category D, which is something called extremely dense, note how you start to lose being able to distinguish that white dot from the background image. By the time you get to D, you can't see it at all, and neither can anybody else. Radiologists are highly trained, they're smart, they're all of these things. They don't have bionic eyes. They just don't. They're not going to, we can't ask someone to see something in a picture that is simply not seeable. And 71% of all breast cancers are in C and D. Simply because, and no one really knows why, but the more dense your breasts, the higher your likelihood of getting breast cancer in the first place. So a woman of category D is 4 to 6 more times likely to be getting breast cancer in her lifetime than somebody of category A. So that, summary quickly on that is sometimes mammography fails those of us who need it the most because we have a higher risk in the first place. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So what do we do about this? What's going on? How can we fix it? This is a chart that shows some of the different modalities that we use to find breast cancer. Found per 1,000 women with dense breasts. This is just dense breasts, not everyone combined, and certainly not dense breast people. This is just dense breasts. So mammography, the plain old that we all know about, get your mammogram, all of that, we'll find about average 3.5 cancers per 1,000 women in dense breasts for every 1,000 with women dense breasts tested. 3.5. So sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's less than 3.5. You know, there are a million different studies. This is about the average, about 3.5. Come along 3D mammogram, which was built to fix this whole problem. And it certainly has not. There is a study out there by an organization called densebreastinfo.org that did a survey of doctors, and way too many doctors think that a 3D mammogram and an MRI are about the same find rate. That scares me a lot, just to be honest. Scares me a lot. It is not even close. It finds about 1, maybe 2 more breast cancers per 1,000 women with dense breasts. But, and again, a new study finds for those extremely dense breast women, no difference. It doesn't help at all. And so while it's not a useless tool, it's a good tool, okay? I'm not saying it's not. It has not solved this problem. Some people add ultrasound into their screening regimen. So they'll do a mammogram or a 3D mammogram, and then they'll follow up with an ultrasound. Ultrasound finds on about average 2, maybe 3 more breast cancers per 1,000 women with dense breasts. So getting there, a little bit more, right? A little bit more. It's helpful. It has its pros and cons. Every modality has its pros and cons. I wish there were a perfect modality. There isn't one. But this is basically what ultrasound does for us. It's a little bit operator dependent, so that makes it kind of difficult depending on where you are, who you've got working in your facility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fairly high false positive, but it finds more. If you're one of the 2 or 3, you know, that get found, great, right? Good stuff. There's something else out there called molecular breast imaging that the Mayo Clinic now uses as standard fare. They use it as standard fare for all their dense breast women, except for probably the really, really high risk women, and they get an MRI. But they feel like combining a 3D mammogram with molecular breast imaging gets them pretty close to what an MRI can give you. So now we're up into the 15-ish breast cancers per found, per 1,000 women tested with dense breasts. So look at the jump there that they're getting by using that screening modality for women with dense breasts. And then there's always the MRI, which is the cat's meow of it. I mean, apparently there is no other modality. If there's more out there, we don't know about it, right? Because MRI finds the most of anything that we've got. Again, it has its pitfalls, pretty high false positive rate, pretty high false alarm. It's weird to do. It's very expensive. It's not paid for as standard cancer screening for anybody except really high risk people. And then there's one more, which as to the best of my knowledge is not FDA approved for screening, called contrast enhanced mammography. I believe they're using this now at Beth Israel Deaconess in Boston. I think I saw a couple people from Boston on this call. They are not using it for standard screening for women who, you know, haven't had cancer yet, but they are using it to surveil people who are survivors because they are by default high risk, right? So anybody who falls into that category, know that I believe that's what they're doing at Beth Israel now. So that's a step forward, I believe, for people who fall into that category in that location. So this is not to tout or put down or anything like that. any of these modalities, because they all find something. It's merely to show you our standard fare, which is up at the top of the chart, where what we're finding in women with dense breasts versus what is there to be found. So all that space up at the top, if you can see my cursor, all this here is being left undetected now, unless we're down here using these modalities to find the cancers that are really there. And that's really frustrating to me. I'm very frustrated about that. And lo and behold, I was someone who fell into that category, whose cancer was not visible on either a mammogram or an ultrasound. Lobular breast cancer, as Abigail alluded to before, is a tricky one. 10 to 15% of all breast cancers are lobular, and it doesn't glob together like a ball, you know? So people say, feel for the lump, feel for the lump. And yes, feel for the lump, but lobular doesn't form a lump. So you're not going to feel it. Through all of my whole diagnosis and everything, there's only one doctor at Mayo Clinic who could feel it. It just feels like a weird thickening. And he's like, he found it in like 1.8 seconds. And I was like, you're kidding me. How? And he said, well, this is what we do all day, you know? So it eludes these technologies that we're currently using as standard. But it did show up like a shining, blinking thing on a PET scan that I got. Molecular breast imaging is kind of like sort of like a little PET scan. It probably would have found it, but not standard of care, not available to me. And I didn't know to ask. I had no idea. Just like most people don't have any idea about any of this, which is why I do what I do. So this is why when I speak to groups, I talk to anybody who will listen, I tell them, you got to be the boss. You have to be the boss of your own breast cancer screening. You have to ask whether you have dense breasts or not if you don't know already. You have to learn the options around you. And also figure out, am I willing to travel? Am I not willing to travel? How much money am I willing to pay out of my pocket or not? All of those decisions we have to make on our own because they are not being made for us in any way at all by the medical community. And then we have to insist and persist to get what we want. And it's not easy. I've got a list of all the excuses in the book of people that have asked their doctors, well, I have dense breasts, I want X, Y, Z. They very often get talked out of it. So we have to be strong. We have to know what we want, and we have to keep asking until we get what we want. Don't give up. So we are going to have a day, February 24th. We want February 24th to be Find Out My Breast Density Day. And we're going to publicize this to all ends of the earth if possible. And what we're asking women to do is to find out their breast density. So that means look at your report. If it's not clear to you from your report, call your doctor and ask and make them tell you whether you have dense breasts or not. You might have to insist and persist even to get that. And then after you find out if you're dense, talk to your doctor about additional screening. That's what we're trying to get out of this Find Out My Breast Density Day. So any help any of you would like to give on this, we would very much, if you can social media it, if you can retweet, if you can get all your friends to do it, have a breast density party. I don't know. Anyway, any help that we can get to make this day successful and to get attention on this issue and action on this issue. So I love awareness. I like action based on the awareness a lot more. So it's all well and fine to be aware of something, but if we don't act on that awareness, we're not getting what we could. So the action is what we're looking for. You don't have to wait till the 24th. We don't even have to have a day in order for you to do this, but we're having a day. I will close with a quote, which makes me very sad, but it's from a radiologist that I work for out in Utah. And this is really how he sums it up from his point of view. As a radiologist who interprets mammograms, I often wonder when I issue a negative screening mammogram report for a woman with dense breasts, as she understands that a report saying no mammographic evidence of malignancy does not mean you don't have cancer. Every time I see a woman with dense breast tissue, often younger, who has come in with advanced breast cancer that was obscured on her mammogram, a way too frequent occurrence, I am certain the system failed her and that we need to do better. We need to do better. And by and large, we really aren't doing better right now. So it's up to us to do better for ourselves, for our friends, our families, our loved ones, our mothers, our daughters, and each other. So let's take some questions now.
I think there was a question about one of the slides where you had the blue and then the red, and just explaining what it meant. And we think it was that mammography was the blue, mammography only, and then the red was the additional cancers.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because we're not throwing mammography out,
right,
in any way, right? So thank you for asking that question, because sometimes I forget to say that. These additional modalities are not replacements. We're not there yet at all, if we ever do get there. And again, mammography is pretty darn good for people who don't have dense breasts. So yes, that's exactly what that was. Thank you for clearing that up. I should say
so
that.
Not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but understanding that there's limitations to the test. Right.
Yeah. So really we ought to be doing individualized screening. That's where we really need to be getting to. And it starts with the mammogram. So if you're that A and B woman and you don't have any other risks, it may be a very nuanced and complicated model, but if you don't have, breast density and your mammogram is good and you don't have any other, issues, then you take one fork in the road. Right?
Okay.
If you have breast density and other factors, then you take a different fork in the road using some of these other modalities that we've talked about. And that's really where we need to get to make sure people are getting what they need, not what is just a standard thing for everybody, which doesn't really work very well.
Right, because we're individuals, not the same person, right?
Same. No, that's right. Yep.
Somebody else was asking, we got a lot of questions as people were RSVPing, but one of the new things that has been significant in, I would say, kind of the complementary arena is thermography. And I noticed that was not on any of your lists. Is that just because it hasn't been studied enough yet to know how effective it is?
It hasn't been studied very much. I will tell you that. I have yet to meet a doctor, find a doctor, talk to a doctor that thinks it's worth anything for screening.
Okay.
So I work with a breast surgeon here locally, and he said, I've had some women who swore by mammography and they come in with a big old cancer. It is not FDA approved for screening. The FDA they do not espouse it for screening. I could never in good conscience tell someone that was good screening for them. It won't hurt you. It just may not help you.
So if someone were to get thermography in addition to a mammogram or in addition to an ultrasound, no issues there. It's just that we don't have the data to know that it's effective.
We don't have
it's not been studied or tested.
Yeah,
Okay.
as a matter of fact, on the My Density Matters options page, thermography is at the bottom. And all the doctors that reviewed it are like, I don't, you don't want that on there. But we put on there, FDA does not think this is right for screening in red, right? Yeah.
Okay. Not that the FDA knows everything, but
not
just
that the
it
FDA
hasn't,
knows
it has,
everything.
right.
No, they don't. But, I guess just heed the warning, heed the warning.
Right, to be careful, yes.
Yeah.
So there was a question in the chat about how do you go about convincing your doctor to do something more than just a mammogram?
I was going to say too, right before you answer, Leslie, one of the things I love about your website is that you have all of these roadblocks, right? We're constantly being confronted with, oh, don't worry about it, or you don't, it's probably benign, et cetera, all of these language. And you've actually put together a cheat sheet for us to navigate with verbatim language we could utilize. So that's exactly where I was going to go with this too. When your radiologist says, no, you may not need an MRI, even though you're advocating for one.
Yeah, we just took all of the quote reasons that we hear that women get when they try to insist and persist and put it in a one-page document for women to have and read. And then we created basically a comeback for each reason that we've heard. Everything is continually improving, right? So if you come up with something else that's not on that document, we'll add it in and keep making it better and better, so that the next person coming along can have an answer to that question in their mind before they go. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've got kind of a cheat sheet for roadblocks. We've got a cheat sheet for talking with your insurance company. We've got a cheat sheet for what to, what's the summary of what density is about to kind of give to a friend, that sort of thing. Yeah, so check it out. Check it out.
Those are great handouts. And I would also add that there are lots of standalone MRI locations who will give you an MRI. You might have to pay out of pocket,
yes,
but a lot of those screening facilities also, if you negotiate with them, they will cut some of the cost as well if you talk to them about your specific situation. And then you can take the receipt and get reimbursed by your insurance company if they do find something. So those are options. They're not easy to do. It's much better to get it approved ahead of time.
Right.
But if this is a thing where you're like, I have to have this, something is there, you find something, you can get reimbursed, even if your doctor's not super cooperative. But I agree, those the cheat sheets are great on the website for navigating a lot of this.
If you're a novice at this, if you're a novice at this, and it's and you're nerve-wracked a little bit about it, which we can be. One thing right, it's nerve-wracking. One thing that I wanted to slip in here is they are also working on something called FAST, or abbreviated MRI, that will be used more for screening than for the diagnostic that it's normally used for now. And there's no insurance code for it yet, to my knowledge. Last time I tried to investigate that, there was no insurance code for it, but I know at least in Philadelphia at UPenn, you can buy it. I think it's like $296. It's not that much.
That's not bad.
$96. I think you can buy yourself abbreviated or fast MRI in Philly at UPenn. I know somebody who's done it. So things like this are starting to crop up. And, your doctor may not even know about it. They may not tell you about it, because it's not standard, it's not standard affair. But this is where we have to educate ourselves, insist and persist, go get it if it's what we think we need. Yeah. So there may be other of those in the United States, but I know UPenn is doing it in Philadelphia.
I love the innovation, right? That the different doctors are looking at different things, and it's wonderful to hear.
Yeah. We still got to go get it ourselves. Go ahead.
Yes. Can we talk about age and how our breasts change throughout? I mean, you guys may see I was diagnosed stage 4 premenopausal, and I was tandem breastfeeding at the time, and that made it even more difficult for them to find it because milk also shows up white on a mammogram, and my breasts were full of that. But how do our breasts change throughout? And menopause was one of the other questions that came up. Do our breasts get more dense as we age?
I'm not an expert on that, but I'll tell you what I know. I know that premenopausal women are more dense than postmenopausal women. So once we go through menopause, the density can reduce. So on average, we're less dense as older people, but then that's just an average. I know postmenopausal women that are still Ds. So don't count on it, you know, but we do lose density after menopause. And as my friendly doctor friend told me, this is part of why you sag after menopause.
Good to know.
Good to know. But also on the flip side of that, we're more dense when we're younger than exacerbating the problem when we're younger, you know? And here's another fun fact. Sometimes the leaner the woman, the more dense she is because she just doesn't have a lot of fat anywhere, you know? So I saw one of the questions that came in before we got started was, how do we reduce our density, exercise, fitness? There's really nothing you can do. Some people take tamoxifen to reduce their density. I'm not going to espouse that. You know, that's a breast cancer drug. I wouldn't, it's up to your doctor, you know, but that's not a standard fare thing to do at all. But generally speaking, you know, if you're lean and fit, you might actually be more dense because you don't have extra on your body anywhere, including your breasts.
That is fascinating. And that's actually what happened to my sister. You know, size 0, super, super, super skinny, very small breasts and extremely dense. And so as soon as I was diagnosed, she of course had to start getting additional surveillance because we have a germline mutation in our family. And she was called back every single time that she got a mammogram to get the additional testing because her breasts were just so dense.
No fat.
Exactly, which is something that was very concerning to her. But I kept telling her, no, this is good that they're calling you back for more testing. That means they're paying attention. So it is good, even though getting that call after you've gotten a mammogram, and I've never experienced that. I literally got my first mammogram as I was getting diagnosed stage 4. But hearing that call to come back and do something else is scary for people.
It is.
But I think it's good maybe if we can adjust how we're thinking about that. It's not that there's something wrong, it's that they're being careful and they're looking carefully at you. To me, that actually sounded good.
Yeah, fair point. Don't be scared. Don't not go because you're scared. You know, go because it's a good thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I like the brain flip there. Thanks for that.
Well, sometimes flipping the narrative, right? Or looking at things from a different perspective can help you be more comfortable with what's happening.
Yes.
Anytime a doctor says something might be wrong, you know, that causes all kinds of anxiety for everybody, especially if there's something going on in your family. There was another question about the timing of getting testing and how your cycle can change the density of your breasts. And the person who had the question said that she was told 7 to 14 days after the first day of your period. So you're done with your period and into the middle of your cycle is the best time. Have you also heard that, Leslie?
I have heard that. I don't know how strictly adhered to that is, you know. Yeah, I have heard that though.
Okay. Another question was, yes, we're getting to the point of disclosure, right? At least people are being informed that their breasts are dense. We talked about the handouts or the information on your website about educating people, but say we're in a conversation and somebody is, well, what is dense breasts? What's your elevator speech on what are dense breasts?
Wow, a little forewarning on that would have been.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Do you have an elevator speech?
I got this. I would say our breasts are made up of two things: fat and all the other stuff that allow us to produce milk. Those things that allow us to produce milk are white on a mammogram. That's your breast density. Breast cancer is also white. So the more of those things that you have, the harder it is to find breast cancer in a mammogram.
That's an excellent elevator speech.
Made it up.
I remember maybe it was 2 years ago now, 3 years ago, when it was only 35 states. And then I think it went up to 38 states and slowly starting to climb. I was flabbergasted that this isn't just the right to know. You're going in for a screening and you're getting information back, and they don't need to disclose that you have dense tissue. That was, the head explosion moment.
Oh.
And right when we were starting off with the podcast, I read my letter on the podcast, because even though it can be disclosed to in these states, but not every state, what they disclose in that letter also varies state by state. So it can.
Oh my word. Absolutely.
So yeah. I think what we're doing in terms of how can we get women to know about their density? Yes, I can't wait for February 24th to hashtag that everywhere and let people know. But it's about bringing you, Leslie, onto the podcast, talking about this. It's about what our nonprofit is also doing and partnering with sororities, going to colleges, educating people who may not necessarily know, but how can we work with education and the young and make this part of the dialogue and the conversation?
Absolutely. Yes. I thought there was going to be somebody on here from an organization called Are You Dense? If you're out there, please make yourself known. But I just want to say something about those letters. There was a woman named Nancy Capello. She is kind of famous, really. Probably more than 10 years ago now, she was diagnosed with sort of late stage 3 breast cancer. And she'd had her mammograms every year, but she had dense breast tissue. She was kind of a lean woman, like we were talking about. And she caught on to this issue. And it became her life's mission to get those laws passed in all of those states. That was primarily her organization is called Are You Dense? She's since passed. Her husband, Joe Capello, now is taking over that organization. And I thought he was going to be on today, but it doesn't look like he is. But I would ask him to speak, if he was on. But that really opened up the conversation, even though we really didn't know what to do with those letters all the time, and they do vary. So, it was kind of all over the place in terms of the language. It got people saying, oh, I think I have dense breasts. Even that is big because it was not disclosed at all before. That chart that I showed you with the 4 categories, that chart could have been made 30 years ago. This is not a new problem. This problem has been going on since mammography began. And we're just now talking about how ineffective it is for many of us. And those letters helped a lot. So just wanted to say that because, sometimes it takes people with guts to go against the grain, stand up for what's right, be maybe a little bit unpopular with what they're saying because they're not going along to get along to make a difference. Yeah.
I think I read something, it was actually part of a blog post that I did about different types of courage. and that there are people that moral courage was one of the types of courage. So people who are willing to speak up and speak out when it's an issue that affects not just them, but other people. And I'm glad, Leslie, that you are one of those with some moral courage to say, wait a second, wait a second, wait a second.
Right.
That's not it. That's not right.
Something's not right.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
But it also takes all of you going to your doctor and saying, what else do I need to be doing? So there's a lot of questions about, are dense breasts hereditary? Do they have something to do with a germline mutation? Leslie, certainly you can speak to some of that, but legitimately, these are all very specific questions that Absolutely. Need to be discussed with your doctor.
Yep.
And, so that personalized care can happen. And I'm sure that all of us are well aware that if it's not a standard of care, it is done this way, that different doctors are going to do different things because it isn't standardized. And so those questions and those, here's the hurdle, here's how you get past the hurdle. I think those are going to be key for everybody to read and really print them out, take them to your doctor, take them to your radiologist, because maybe your radiologist needs to see all those things that they're just saying off the top of their heads. Maybe they need to see that, they need to be thinking more about it. But Leslie, a lot of the other questions are timing. How often should someone get surveillance? Especially if you have dense breasts. What do you have any suggestions there?
The standard is once a year. I would certainly stick with that because that is, that's what's recommended. You won't have any trouble getting something once a year because it is standard, right? Beyond that, it's an individual thing. I know some people who are high risk, who are on a 6-month alternating thing. A lot of times it's, a mammogram, 6 months, MRI, 6 months. I also know people who are on alternating 3D mammogram, molecular breast imaging, 6 months, routine. Again, as you suggested, that's all out of standard and more than standard. And we'd have to fight for that, especially if our doctor isn't gonna come. Some of them will be like, oh, well, you are have X reason, Y reason, and Z reason, so I recommend this instead, and that's a great doctor, who's willing to go beyond.
Yes, absolutely. But let's not forget that you may have a doctor who is perfectly willing to order the test, but then you've got the insurance company who may or may not want to do it as well. And that's something that to consider. Also, I have found, having very good insurance through my husband's work, my doctors are much more apt to order more tests because they know that I have good insurance. And so I think that this does come back to some disparities. If you've got Medicare or Medicaid, it's a lot more rigid in terms of how often you can get certain tests.
It is. And what I've also found, much to my chagrin, which I didn't really realize until I got into, going to doctors all the time. If something's not covered by insurance, they won't even bring it up.
Wow.
They will not even bring it up to you. And I'm thinking, I want the option to either fight with my insurance company about it or pay for it myself, or do what you suggested a few minutes ago and try to negotiate, but if I don't know it even exists and it's not presented to me because it's not a no-brainer that my insurance company is going to pay for it, puts me at a disadvantage, right?
It really does. And then back to that, educating yourself so that you're asking, well, what about this?
Right. And
again, your website is great in terms of listing out the different types of things that are possible to ask for.
Yeah.
Is one of the other questions is it true that only a mammogram can detect if your breasts are dense?
Yes, that is how you find out if you are dense or not. It's the only way to find out. So that's why it's always that first line thing with screening, right? And I just want to shout out to the state of Illinois, if I could. They will pay, mandatory that insurance pays for one baseline mammogram from 35 to 39.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Wow.
But I don't think a lot of women know about it. So that's something else I'm trying to like about in the state of Illinois, you know, because so then as a younger woman before 40, when it's guaranteed that insurance company will pay for a mammogram, which isn't all that expensive anyway, you can find out your breast density, get an assessment, talk to your doctor. Okay, here's my other risk factors. Now, what's my screening plan beyond the norm? You can start even earlier. I wish every state had that.
That is wonderful. Now, I do recall that my insurance company would have paid for me to get a mammogram at 36 because of the family history.
There you go.
But I was in the middle of pregnancy. I was in the middle of pregnancy and breastfeeding, and you don't go get mammograms when you're pregnant.
No. Even though you're a little higher risk around pregnancy time, as you well know.
Well, and that is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, that in the 5 years postpartum, your risk for breast cancer is actually elevated.
Yes.
And even if you're breastfeeding, and a lot of people think, oh, well, I'm breastfeeding, so that means my risk of cancer is lowered. And it is longitudinally, but in that first 5 years, breastfeeding actually does increase your risk. And so knowing your family history, knowing what to look for, that's significant.
Yes.
And knowing your breast density, of course, they get denser when all the milk is there.
Right, yeah. Yeah.
There was another question about, so someone is already stage 4. Her breast cancer was missed on her mammogram and ultrasound, even though she directed them to the lump. Her mets are in her liver, and her oncologist is suggesting another mammogram for surveillance. But she doesn't think that it makes any sense to do another mammogram under these circumstances. What do you think, Leslie? I know you can't give medical advice, and we're not giving medical advice in this context.
Medical advice, but if that were me, first of all, if you have dense breasts, a mammogram isn't enough. I might be worried about another different breast cancer. So that's why I would surveil with more than a mammogram if you have dense breasts under that scenario. That's me talking.
So I know for me, I had a lumpectomy, so I still have a ton of breast tissue left, but I'm still getting a PET scan every 3 months. And so my medical oncologist is like, well, why would you go get a mammogram? Not that I'm asking to go get a mammogram because
show up on the PET scan.
Yes.
Yes.
The PET scan will catch anything that's metabolically active. And I think, Leslie, you had said that, your cancer, lobular cancer specifically, is there an issue with it showing up on a PET scan if you have lobular breast cancer?
It doesn't show up quite as much, but when I actually ultimately got the PET, it showed kind of like a light green activity in a lot of my bones. It wasn't, again, lobular is not a ball, right? It just kind of is, it can be kind of like a little everywhere. And that's the way it was in the bones. But then it also showed up in the breast. That was the only modality that ever showed the breast cancer in the breast. Okay, I can go back to that initial PET scan, and I can see a big thing right in the left where it was. Doesn't show up now because it's not
good
active. But yeah,
it's very good that it's not showing up now.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know that there are, Laura, do you see any other questions that we have not addressed? If anybody here has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Yeah, I think.
I think that, so tell us more about the national efforts. Is that something that you guys are working on, statewide? Is that more of a legislative advocacy type initiative, or what is it that's that you're doing to get us to the point of national and kind of standardizing this type of issue?
Yeah. So, like I said, there's this language that Senator Dianne Feinstein got into the last appropriations bill that asks that the FDA change their language around breast density. I mean, how would you talk about it? And that language change has not been determined, and it's not out there yet. But that's a step forward. I think it's going to be a while before this individualized care with all these other options that are available becomes standard for all of us, to the point where we don't have to worry about it ourselves. So here's kind of what I've decided about myself. There's an organization called Dense Breast Info, which is the be all end all of every tiny little bit of information, and for doctors as well, maybe even mainly for doctors, about breast density. They've got every little tiny thing covered. The other organizations I talked about are UDense. I mean, they're pretty legislative focused. Like I said, they're the ones that got these letters out and all this kind of stuff. I've kind of self-appointed my organization and me to be that person that revs up women to go get what they want on their own, regardless of what else happens. So that's what I focus on. That ask, learn, insist, and persist. I am pretty laser focused on those 4 words. It's a simple message. It's not that easy to do, so we want to provide support for that. But it's kind of like, if you're everywhere, you're kind of nowhere. So I've decided, I want to be that person that, and I'll take all the help I can get. If somebody else can do it better, faster, fantastic. But my focus is education for women, getting them to ask, learn, insist, and persist. And by doing that, I think the medical community and the doctors are going to get sick of us doing it. And they're going to make some changes.
Thorn in their side.
Tired of us hearing about it. I hope on February 24th, they're all like, what is going on? And they decide to make some changes for the better, because they're being pestered by us. That would make me so happy. I couldn't even tell you how happy that would make me, as if they said, oh, well, we better be doing things different then, because they're calling in droves.
So there's your marching orders, ladies. Be the pests. Call your doctor.
Don't look at it that way, though. I'm kind of sorry I used that word. Advocate for yourself, right? I mean, because, yeah, it's important that we, this is one way to get there. I'm not hoping it's kind of like a trifecta. You've got the one with all the detailed information. You've got the one who's really looking at legislation. And then me, who is just getting women to advocate for themselves. Maybe between all of us, we can get there.
Maybe a better metaphor is the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
That's right.
Right? Pay attention.
Squeaky wheel.
There was one question about Biosorb, which is a synthetic coil with metal clips that tracks the location of the tumor bead, and also is a scaffold for breast reconstruction post lumpectomy. Does anybody recognize that? Jane, I think you were the one who brought that up. If you want to talk more about that, that's great. I'm seeing a confused look on Leslie's case. Leslie's face.
Yeah. So in our Southern California, Orange County area, I think a majority of lumpectomy patients cared by Hoag Hospital are having this biosorb implanted right after the lumpectomy. So mine was implanted in the same surgery when the tumor was taken out. So it serves as two purposes. One is to track the location of tumor bed so that the metal clips, it has 6 metal clips on it. So during radiation, the radiologist will have a very easy time to locate the beams to the tumor bed. The other advantage is that it serves as a scaffold for your breast tissue to reconstruct. So cosmetically, it is a very good benefit because your breast doesn't have a dip, and your breast actually looks pretty full. The problem with mine is that it hardly disappeared. It should supposed to be self-absorbed after 6 or 9 months. Mine is like largely there. So I'm going to have a mammogram in a few days. So I'm like worried, like, would it hurt? Because it's actually feels like a little ball there. When I move my arms, that piece actually moves together with my arms. So it's actually integrated into my breast. But the cosmetic,
that is fascinating.
Yeah, the cosmetic impact is very favorable because your breast looks really nice. Like nobody knows that you actually had a piece I removed other than the scar there. I've seen on the website that some women complain that some people even had it for 3 years, is still there. The company who makes for it, and they said usually disappears about a year. So I'm just curious to see if anybody else had it and whether how soon theirs disappeared. Mine is close to the skin, so I felt that might be the reason why I still have it. Other people had it more deep. Even if it's still there, they may not feel it.
That is fascinating.
I can't speak to that at all.
Okay.
Not familiar. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah.
Please let us know how your mammogram goes. That sounds quite interesting. Sure. Yeah, I
definitely ask for an MRI now that I heard from Leslie that how important it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully whatever metal it is doesn't interfere with the MRI.
It doesn't. I'm sure it's very tiny.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's very tiny metal clip. It's the same metal clip that you get when you have a biopsy.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I like the idea of not having the divot because my breast cancer was right here at 10 o'clock. And so I had a pretty significant divot after my lumpectomy. And I just got a tattoo to camouflage it. But the idea of them being able to help your tissue fill in the area. I mean, that again, just with the creativity, right? That's fascinating to me that someone was able to do that. So thank you for sharing about that. And we'd love to hear how it goes.
And I heard from our radiation oncologist that it's about like 70–80% of patients he saw have that now. Yes, it's getting popular, but still, I think they have not educated patients enough about how fast it's going to disappear and what's its impact on mammogram if you had it. The mine is already about 6 months by now and still like feels like a little ball there.
This is something new to me.
Well, it sounds like you're doing exactly what Leslie was talking about, which is empowering yourself with information, asking questions so that you know the right questions to ask. So kudos to you on that. But I see that we are just a little bit after 5 o'clock. So Leslie, do you have any last thoughts for the audience here, which seems to be a mix of breast cancer and not breast cancer individuals?
Yeah. Just thank you so much for having me. I'm a broken record. Ask, learn, insist, and persist. And finally, let us know how it goes. give us feedback on when you do make your action based on what you learned today. Let us know how it goes, so that we can then use that information to help other women going forward. And so that we can, fill out our cheat sheets better and all of those kinds of things. Use the website, use the downloads, share with the friends, retweet, etc. on February 24th. We want this to reach all corners. So thank you again so much for having me. Loved it. Enjoyed every minute. Thank you so much.